Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Resource and Support Hub webinar on ensuring safe communications for civil society organizations in Nigeria. The Resource and Support Hub is a foreign and Commonwealth development organizations program to support organizations in the aid sector to strengthen their policy and practice on safeguarding, in particular on sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. I am Sylvia Nwoko, a communications consultant with the Nigeria Resource and Support Hub. Please be informed that we have available closed captioner. You can access the closed caption feature by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. In today's webinar, we will be looking at safe communication as an essential component of every civil society organization's activities. You will agree with me that ensuring that our communication is safe has to be deliberate and intentional. In this webinar, the speakers will share tips on safe media and communications as outlined in the Resource and Support Hub tip sheets. The link to this resource will be shared in the chat shortly. The panelists will also share practical insights in managing the risks of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, SEAH, in media and communications practice. In order to do this, we have invited two wonderful speakers who will talk us through each key part of this webinar. Our first speaker is Lola Adeola-Oni. Lola is the principal consultant at Track Development Hub. She is a development and humanitarian practitioner with expertise in protection, safeguarding, PSEA, accountability, inclusion, human rights, digital rights and programming, and communication for development. She has over 11 years of experience in various roles as an international development specialist and has worked in the United Kingdom, Europe, Asia, and sub-Saharan African countries, where she provides technical support on safeguarding product development, ranging from safeguarding awareness and prevention materials to safeguarding reporting and responding guidance on documentation templates, and documentation templates. Lola has led numerous safeguarding investigations into sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment allegations involving humanitarian staff in sub-Saharan Africa. She has consulted for many international NGOs and UN agencies, including the Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub, where she currently serves as the chair of the National Expert Board for the Nigerian Hub. Lola is also a certified safeguarding investigator and training facilitator. Lola's presentation today will focus on what safe communication is, why safe communication is essential for civil society organizations, some of the safeguarding risks in media and communications, and a 9-step approach to mitigating media and communication safeguarding risks. Our second speaker today is Bartholomew Agyo. Bartholomew is the gender-based violence and protection manager at Salient Humanitarian Organization, SHO. He is currently working in the Northeast Nigeria. He doubles as SHO's internal safeguarding mentor and safeguarding focal points. He holds a diploma and a Bachelor of Science in Mass Communication, and he remains a media and communication enthusiast. He has 2 years of experience in the development sector and 11 years of experience in the emergency sector. Today, Bart's presentation will focus on benefits of ensuring safe communication, possible barriers and challenges in ensuring safe communications, and practical application and recommendations to overcome these challenges. Now that you all have an idea of what awaits you, let us take a few points on housekeeping. First, you're all on mute with your videos turned off. This is to support with the quality and connection of the webinar. If you have any technical hitches or difficulties, kindly indicate in the chat and we will be on hand to help you. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and we will share the recording on our website afterwards. Note that your names will not be visible. If during the presentation you would like to ask any questions, please add them to the Q&A function throughout the webinar. You can find the Q&A function in your controls panel at the bottom of your screen. Our speakers will answer them at the end of the presentations. You can add new questions or you can upvote existing questions. And with that, it's an honor to invite our first speaker for today, Lola Adeola-Oni.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So just like Sylvia mentioned, my presentation today will be looking at key definitions. I think it's always important to remind ourselves of what safeguarding is and what safe communication is. I would also be looking at key safeguarding risk in our communication that we all need to be mindful of. And finally, I will take you all through the RSH 9 steps to safe communication based on the recently developed tip sheet that has been shared in the link. So what do we mean by safeguarding? Just a quick reminder, this means taking all reasonable steps to prevent sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment and other forms of harm from occurring in order to protect people, especially vulnerable adults and children from that harm, as well as to respond appropriately when harm does occur. Safeguarding addresses harm that may be caused by a staff member or a representative of your organization, like a volunteer, a consultant, your vendors, and the likes, even journalists, for instance, since we're talking about safe communication, and or the organization's operations or programs. And this is where safe communication does sit, because for safe communication, we are referring to ensuring that you still continue to follow the do no harm principle that you would find in our safeguarding principle through the careful identification and management of the risk of sexual exploitation, abuse, harassment, and any other forms of harm that could arise from your organization's media or communication works. Now, when we talk about communication, there are 3 main or broad methods that you can use. The first is the traditional media, where you would find broadcast, which is using visuals, audio visuals. You would find radio that uses just audio, and you would find print that uses text. For digital platforms, this normally is a combination of the traditional media. So for instance, you would find social media that you would use both visuals, audio, and text. You would see websites, emails, YouTube, newsletters, online conferences, and even online webinars as this. And then you have on-the-ground events like your conferences, your fundraising events, your advocacy events, symposium, or networking events. So now that we've covered the three methods, or the three main methods for communication, here are some of the safeguarding risks that you would find inherent in this when you use this method. The first is dignity and privacy of your program participants. It's oftentimes we expose our program participants to this sort of harm when we use derogatory words for them, or we over sensationalize the issue that we are talking about. And then privacy, making sure when we do not keep the data, the personal data of our program participants or any other persons included in our communications work. Then you have the danger of a single story. That is when we do not balance the voices of everyone that we are representing, making sure that runs through the danger of single story. There's also the exposure to risk and the harm posed by the media. Now that media has gone, communication work has gone digital, there's a high risk of online exploitation, hate speech, and the likes as well. Then you have informed consent, when we do not obtain permission from our program participants or the people involved in our communication materials, and we do not give them the opportunity to withdraw their consent should they ever change their mind. There is a risk also of exposing them to the 3 core areas of safeguarding risk, which I will go through when I'm covering the 9 steps. Then there's the no consideration for red tape. So for instance, internal conflict, securities risk, such as we have in Nigeria, where we do not consider the impact, especially when we're covering stories or telling stories of people who are directly impacted by these conflict situations. Also not being inclusive or locally, or when our communication is not locally appropriate. Making sure that we are sticking to the norms and the customs and the values of our people in our communications work. And then there is also the risk of traumatization for communication and media subjects when we continue to interview a particular subject, especially vulnerable groups, such as those, such as survivors of gender-based abuse. And then you have the data protection and privacy breach, when we fail to protect the privacy, the personal data or sensitive data of those included in our communication materials. And lastly, the unintended consequences. We can, even after we have prepared, sometimes harm or risk still does happen. And then people are faced with backlash, hate speech, and online harassment. So now, how can we ensure that we protect the people involved in our communication work from some of the risks that I identified above? Now, using the RSH 9 steps to communication, the first is develop a risk-based approach. Always identify and manage safeguarding risk of your media and communications work. Your risk assessment is your best friend. You must do that at the beginning of you planning a communication activity or a communication project. Number 2 is include safe media and communication in your safeguarding policy. Yes, always include media and communications in your safeguarding policy and in your safeguarding in your media and communications policy. Now, your safeguarding focal point should be your best friend if you're working in the communication space, because they can help you also fine-tune your risk assessment, making sure that you're putting in place the right mitigation plan. Your communication staff must understand the safeguarding standards that you have set in your organization that would protect program participants from unintended consequences from your communications activity. And then be prepared. Your meetings must be safe and pose no danger to persons you're collecting information from or to others. You must have a good reporting systems available, because even your best efforts, things still do go wrong. So you must always be prepared to handle anything that happens as a result, any backlash or even re-traumatization that happens as a result of your communications work. Number 4, keep messages respectful and balanced. Respect the value and worth and dignity of all people you are communicating about. Do not over-sensationalize your communication media because you want people to feel sorry. Your communication should be geared towards evoking empathy and not sympathy. You mustn't use derogatory words also as well, to making sure that it's respectful. Number 5, protects people's privacy and confidentiality. Respects privacy and confidentiality are critical when developing communications materials, making sure that you stick to using the images you've collected, the stories you've told, to the context of which you have told them you're going to collect it. And this leads us good to gathering informed consent, which is number 6. Now, by gathering informed consent, I would always say that you stick to the 4 W's and H, which is you must inform program participants why you're collecting, where this information will be used, what's the purpose for the information that you're collecting, and how it would be used. The participant that you're obtaining your informed consent from, they must understand this and also understand the risk involved for them telling you their story. So always remember telling them what the data or images will be used for, why the data is being collected, where and how you're going to collect it, who will use their data, and who the audience is. It is very vital. Number 7, protect the data gathered for media and communication. Ensure that the images and information are stored or managed in a very secure and safe space. Ensure that your media and communication staff familiarize themselves with the core General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR principles, which many international organizations, including yourselves, hold yourself accountable to. Number 8 is be aware when including the voices of victims or survivors of SEAH. So be aware of both the importance and the risk of engaging victims or survivors of SEAH in your media and communication work. Because yes, it's good to get their voices, but also remember that it does come with high risk. And as a result, you must follow the safeguarding, you must ensure that you cover either their faces, their names, you do not use their names, as well as not using their location, because you want to protect them to the best of your ability. And then the 9th one is include the voices of persons with disability and mental health disorders. So proactively seek ways to include persons with disability and mental health disorders in your communication and your media work. Where you do not have the expertise, please reach out to organizations working with persons with disability to help you identify those risks. The tip sheet that has also been shared also contains, for the different communication platforms, the different risks that you would find across the different disability impairments, and they would guide you into ensuring that your communication is safe. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Lola, for sharing those amazing tips and those beautiful 9 steps. And it is with great pleasure also that I invite our second speaker for today, Bartholomew Agyo.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and I am happy to be here. Yes, subsequently, we'll be looking at bringing to our understanding safe communication. And then we'll also identify possible barriers and challenges in ensuring safe communication. We'll go further to provide practical application and recommendations to overcome the challenges we'll be mentioning today. Next slide, please. Yes, as much as we try to promote our activities in the media, we understand that there are disadvantages to some of these things we do. But again, we want to bring to our knowledge the benefits of ensuring safe communication before we open our eyes to the dangers that communication can pose to our activities. And then as we do safe communication, it promotes the principle of do no harm. Now, this principle holds us responsible at every point in time that as we implement in our various locations or communities, we are meant to hold ourselves responsible to try as much as possible limit the unintended harms that will come to the beneficiary. So when we do safe communication, this do no harm principle is promoted because harm is eliminated. And then we build trust because there are so many things we put in place to ensure that safe communication is possible. The communities where we implement get to trust that we cannot do any harm to them and that we have come for good and we have come to make them, bring succor to their concerns rather than destroy them. So at the end of the day, it builds a lot of trust between us, the implementing partners, and the beneficiaries, even including the donor agencies that are helping us to bring succor to this population of concern. It also fosters dignity and respect, that you have to consider every part of your communication activity and make it look right. It means that you are going to give everybody the dignity they deserve, the ones that are inherent, the dignity they've been born with, and that can never be infringed. And then as we ensure safe communication, we also empower our beneficiaries because at some point, we'll have to involve them in our media activities. They are taught how to operate the media gadgets. And at some point, they can even become media experts and move on with their life. So in that sense, we empower them and they are fully part of our implementations. Safe communication also enhances privacy and confidentiality. That at some point, if people do not feel comfortable to share certain information, we allow it slide because they are not comfortable to share such information. So in that sense, it also enhances safe communication. It also reinforces the act of accountability to the population of concern and the donors. That at every point, we are meant to let our beneficiaries understand the implication of our implementations. And the only way we can do that is to use the media to let them understand how our implementations go. And they use the same medium to get back to us to let us know how well we have been implementing. When the disseminated information is authentic, at some point, a lot of people would not want to balance stories. But when you are ensuring safe communication, you look at every side of a story. And as you begin to join every part of a story to make it a whole and make it give a complete sense, it ensures authenticity so that every side of the story is presented. And then it makes communication very safe. And then this takes us to possible barriers and challenges in ensuring safe communication. Now, in the course of trying to make our communication safe, there is difficulty in accessing and broadcasting information by civil society organizations. Because if at some point, some people are not ready to share certain information, you would have to stop and allow them share it when they are comfortable. So in that sense, it makes it very, very difficult to access information to be disseminated. And then there is huge budget for media engagement and activities. In ensuring that your communication should be safe, you need to use a lot of money for your media engagement and activities so as to avert any harm that will come during your media activities. Disability inclusion entails extra responsibilities and requirements for effective mainstreaming. Now we are meant to include the voices of people living with disability in our media at every point. But again, not every civil society organization knows how to do disability inclusion. It is because it is expensive, and then the knowledge about disability inclusion is low. Data protection could limit the exposure of some facts because you're trying to see that not everything about somebody who has been sexually abused or maybe has gone through some form of harm. I mean, you're trying to see that such information is not shared, maybe especially when it is against their wish, means that it is going to limit the exposure of some facts because definitely you will have to keep those facts. Withdrawal of some content, withdrawal of content is a constraint, but must be respected. We know that sometimes people tell you they don't want to share their stories, but maybe because you've been able to talk to them, they allow you to share those stories, or maybe they are able to give their consent towards sharing the stories. And at some point they tell you, no, they don't feel comfortable sharing whatever it is they've gone through with you anymore. And again, at that point, you'll be confused because already you've gotten consent and you're preparing already to make your story known. And at the end of the day, they withdraw their consent. Privacy protection could limit utilization of compelling facts. Now you're trying to protect privacy. It then means that there are certain things you would not have to expose about this person. Something that's happened, where did it happen? You have the duty not to expose the person's address, the person's name, or the person's face. So it then means that some of the facts surrounding this person would not be known by the people who know about that story. And now we are going to have practical applications and recommendations to have overcome these challenges we have mentioned. You have to dedicate time for your communication because it is worth it. When somebody say they don't want to share stories when they are not comfortable, I mean, sometimes people get re-traumatized when they share stories. So it doesn't mean that you would ask them for that story for just that day and then leave because they are not comfortable. You would have to dedicate your time to it and know when that person is comfortable sharing that story, or when you will not re-traumatize them when you ask them to share such discussions with your donor around media engagement and activities. It is possible that you do not have money to carry out these media activities to ensure safety. But again, you have to understand that your donors want you to make your activities known so that they would also be known that they are supposed to do this. So it's important for you to hold discussions with them. Let them know what you want to do so that they can support you. You can also seek support from organizations with disability inclusion capacity. This means that they can support you either with the funding to do disability inclusion or build your capacity towards disability inclusion in your media activities. You are also supposed to share data on the need to. Sharing data means that somebody has a solution to proffer to that data you're sharing. And so if somebody does not have knowledge about how to solve your problem, it is not important. You do not have to share data. But when you share data on the need to know, definitely a solution will come. And then we also need to avoid consent withdrawal by gaining trust. I know that for some time we have been working with OCHA, and anytime they are going to the field, they try to involve us. They involve us because in these locations they would want to cover, we are working there, and over time we have built trust with the community, and then they are very free to give consent so that coverage can be done. So thank you very much. And there are other resources you can also go through on the slide I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Bart, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you for taking us through some of the recommendations that we can put to use when going through these safe communication challenges. Before we go into our Q&A session, we would like to acknowledge our Ethiopia Resource and Support Hub colleagues, as they are the ones that develop the core content of the tip sheet and the accompanying infographic. RSH Nigeria contextualized it to suit our audience. Once again, the link to this tip sheet can be seen in the chat. We'll now go into our Q&A session to answer your questions. We have a question for Lola. If panelists can put on their videos. The question says, thank you, Lola, for your insightful presentation. I need more light on your point on communicating for empathy, not sympathy. So that's one question. And then the second one is, what is the place of staff training and capacity building in safe communication?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. Yes, so when we say empathy, have you seen some of these fundraising videos? I think the ones that come to my mind is, have you seen some of these fundraising videos where you would find children, you would find them maybe almost naked, and then there's like maybe one fly on their nose or their mouth that would not go, and they are soliciting for, even if it is 1 naira or 5 naira, to support the relief, maybe in Northeast Nigeria, right? That is what I mean by sympathy. Ideally, you want people to show empathy, and showing empathy, there's a thin line between sympathy and empathy. Basically, what you want people to see is the need for the support, or even if it's a story you want to break, if it's a case study from the worst case scenario, and then this person has become a success today, you still want to humane them. You want to give them that human dignity, so that you're not re-traumatizing them. And, and they're also proud to be associated with it. So basically, that's what I mean by showing empathy and not sympathy. In terms of training, of course, you can never emphasize the need for staff training. It's the reason why one of the steps is including safe communication in your safeguarding policy, because staff, for instance, must understand these basic safe communication principles. They must also know how to behave whether it's online or offline with your program participants. For instance, not asking for a friendship request from a program participant on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, because that will be going against your safeguarding or safe communication principle. And you have to continue to train staff to understand this, so that they do not blur the line from, that professionalism line, especially when they're going out to obtain informed consent. They also need to be mindful of the culture and the norms as well, in terms of places where you're going. Like Barth shared a very important case study in terms of working with OCHA, and they asking them to come to the field anytime they're going for content gathering. So yes, you can never overemphasize the need for staff training when it comes to safe communication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lola, for that. The next question, I think we'll direct it to Bartholomew. It says, I want to know the sustainability plans of this training and I'm sorry about that. I think this should still go to you, Lola. Sorry. I want to know the sustainability plans for this training and the need to form a community of the participants.
Can you take the question again? Sorry.
So the participant wants to know what the sustainability plans are for this training that you talked about, and also the need, if there is a need, to form a community for these participants that you're training.
Oh, yes. On RSH website, you have all the links that they have shared with you. Just go in, even you can find it, just type safe communication, for instance, or type, say, disability inclusion. You would find all the necessary slides. You find all the necessary materials and tip sheets concerning this. Yes, it would be good to build maybe a communication of practice with bringing together, but it would be one that would bring together both communication experts and both safeguarding experts. Because if for anything, what I've normally seen is that communication people work in silo and then safeguarding people work in silo. So for you to have an expert board, for instance, you want to make sure that your communication people and your safeguarding people are feeding off each other. You don't produce a communication material at the end and then you bring in your safeguarding focal points. So it must be that you have consistent training and working relationship with those two people at the same time. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Lola, for that. So another participant says, is there any plan to meet and consolidate this feat physically? That should go to Barth. I'm a bit uncertain what this feat is, but I want to believe, could it be these challenges? So that's why I'm directing it to Barth. Is there any plans to meet and consolidate this feat physically?
Yes, it is very possible. We are meant to support ourselves in the course of our implementation. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to meet physically and consolidate on what we have started now or what we are doing right now. I understand that RSH would always be there to give us the support we need, but I think it is very possible for us to meet physically and consolidate that. It depends on how we are able to foster that. But like I mentioned earlier, I think we can do that through RSH. I don't know if that is answered.
All right, thank you very much, Bach. This other question would also go to you, please. It says, I would like to know what happens when someone withdraws consent after you've processed, compiled, and even forwarded to your other partners already. How do you go about retracting it?
Now, when we're talking about consent, when Lola mentioned consent earlier, she talked about the 4 W's and H. She talked about letting the person given the consent when the material will be used, how it will be used, and why it will be used, and all of that. And so if you're able to let the person you are covering know all of these 5 W's and H, the person would be able to determine when to withdraw consent and when to lay low about consent. Now, if the duration has come and the person is yet to withdraw consent, or maybe the person withdraws consent after you have already done the broadcast or dissemination of the information, then means that you possibly were not able to let the person understand when and how you'll be using the information you have gathered. And so I think that the possible ways to mitigate that is to write a rejoinder if at the end of the day that has passed, and possibly let your position know through those medium you did the broadcast or the dissemination that this is the situation. This person earlier gave their consent, but at the moment it is withdrawn. If there are tapes to that effect, I think they should be destroyed because consent has been withdrawn. But again, it is very, very important to let people know or let the population of concern understand when and how you are using their material so that they will have a say before it will be put to use. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bart, for explaining that thoroughly. I think this next one will go to you, Lola. what is your advice on dealing with resistance from staff who may feel that these safeguarding processes are too troublesome to go through? So, you know, we listed 9 steps, so they might think that these steps are just too much.
I think that's an easy one. I think, again, it goes back to the step in terms of ensuring that your safeguarding or communication policy is embedded in your safeguarding policy. And so if they have signed onto the safeguarding policy, if your staff then feel that it is too much for them to handle, then that means that it could lead to a breach in your safeguarding policy, of which I would expect any organization that sanctions, the right sanctions should be taken. It is important to make sure that staff don't feel overwhelmed by these 9 steps, because I have seen organizations where program participants have sued because maybe consent was not obtained, or it was used for something else, or it was used longer than the period when it was obtained. And so, which means that, and it also goes against the GDPR policy as well, which you would pay a lot of fine if an allegation of that nature is brought against your organization. So I would say it is in the best interest of the organization to try to stick to these 9 principles, and it would also be the best interest of staff as well, as not to see it overwhelming, but rather to seek support from your safeguarding focal points, from RSH, and from people that can support you to ensure that you're able to manage this, the possible risk in your in your communication activities or materials or content that you're putting out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lola, for that explicit response. This next question would go to you, Bart. I would like to know how one can deal with third-party interests in sharing information in cases where we have consent from the population of concerns, for example, relative to, with consent from the population of concerns, and then she states an example, a relative to the population of concern, government agencies, etc. Did you get the question, or do I repeat it?
Yeah, where somebody cannot, instances where somebody cannot give consent is where the person is under the age of 18, yes. And then if anybody below that age of 18 is involved in any media activity that has to do with any of the CSOs, it is important to reach out to somebody that can give consent on that person's behalf. So consent is not something that you would see to be something you must get at the point you need it. It has to be gradual. So if that person is not in the position to give you consent, it's important to see the person's caregiver who would make all of the considerations on behalf of the person you're seeking consent from, so that when consent is given, it is not altered. It is something we have to be careful with. It is not also space magic. It is something that has to do with a lot of processes. After considering whatever it is you know you're going to do and the implication of what you are meant to do, which is the reason why we are stressing training and retraining of media personnel. And that even if you are recruiting somebody to do media coverage for you, it is important to note that that person has to understand your in-house policy concerning the media, so that consent can be handled very well. So if somebody is not in the position to give consent, do not seek consent from that person. Try to see who can help the person. Consider all of the options you have so that consent can be.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bath, for that. We'll move to Lola now for the next question. The question goes, what is the best practice of documenting consent form?
Okay, thanks. I'm glad you asked me that. I just also wanted to touch on briefly, if you don't mind, to the last question that Bart also spoke about in terms of consent, since we're still talking about consent. Yes, I am aware that you obtain consent from anyone above the age of 18, but also for children, you can still obtain assents from children. I've been in different scenarios where a parent or a caregiver had given consent for a picture of a child to be taken. And during your interview or consultation with the child tells you, I don't want my picture taken. That is assent, because you ask them, is it okay for us to still go ahead to take your picture or to still go ahead to ask you this question? If a child doesn't give assent, especially if it's the child who is knowledgeable and is of a certain age, definitely, please also try to obtain assent from the child. In terms of consent now, in terms of documenting consent, I always prefer online consent in terms of once you have the paper signed, find a safe place to upload the consent form that you have. Now, list all the names of the people, have a digital copy of the consent form that people have signed, create an Excel sheet. This is how I would do it. Create an Excel sheet listing out the names of the people who you've obtained, the information contained in the consent form that you have. This is because you may decide to trash the paper copy that you have. But if you have it saved somewhere in your server, in your organization server, in a safe and secure server, then you risk, then you're able to protect yourself against the risk of data protection or data privacy breach. So I would say always have a soft copy of your consent, of the consent form, because years after, I've seen where programs 1 year after a communications material went out, we needed to check whether somebody gave consent or not. It was because we had a soft copy of the consent form that we were able, and people move organizations. So always have a soft copy at hand to always refer back to, should you ever need, to go back to check, or somebody is withdrawing consent, or what have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lola, for that. The next question I would share with Barth. It says, we are now aware that cameras are secretly put in hotels. We are also not informed, nor our consent sought. Please, how do we deal with these issues such as that, and what to do with such video clips what to do with such video clips, assuming it was really a private setting? You're on mute, Bart. You need to take yourself off mute, please.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a straight answer for that, but it depends on what action you want to take against the hotel after knowing that your privacy has been infringed. I think there is a space to file for infringement of privacy and the court. So you can as well seek redress if that happens. I think the Constitution makes provision for that. So I don't know if they possibly must have obtained a permit to do that. If it is, if they have not obtained a permit to do that, I think they have infringed on your privacy and you can seek redress.
Thank you very much for that, Barth. Lola, you might want to handle this. It says, looking at the funding that is linked with safeguarding, safe communications in particular, from the donor point, most budget gets to be very stringent, that it does not entirely favor implementing the safeguarding processes. How do we then make our donor bodies have safeguarding inclusiveness in the budget proposal?
Thank you very much. I would say it goes back to your proposal. At the point when you were developing your proposal, and you're going to have activities around communication, did you budget for safeguarding in your proposal? Because it is very critical if it is very critical to the work that you do, my advice is always budget for safeguarding in your proposal. And let the donor come back to you and say they can't fund your safeguarding risk mitigation plan, right? And then you may choose to take out the program or the activity that has high risk that your money cannot cover. But I would always say, always make sure that you have a separate safeguarding budget within your proposal to donors. And oftentimes I hear people say donors will take that out, but I haven't. If you come out with a good narrative in your proposal and you've identified your safeguarding risk in your communications activities, and you have budgeted for the mitigation that you would need to put in place, I rarely see any time when a donor would come back to you and say they can't fund it, except you haven't given them the rationale for the money that you have proposed in it. So I would say always make sure that you put aside a separate safeguarding funding or budget that aligns with the activities that you want to carry out. And if communication is included, please also make sure that you have put in the right amount of money to cover the necessary mitigations that you may be looking at putting in place for that communication activity. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lola, for that. And this would be the last question we can take for today. I'll direct it to you, Barth. It's a three-part question. How can you go about the issue where survivor denied giving his consent in the first place, not withdrawing? And what are the possible reasons of survivors denying the fact that they gave consent in the first place? And how can you prove that they have given their consent in the first place?
Now, first of all, it goes back to the issue of documentation that Lola mentioned. If you have somebody give you consent, and at the end of the day, you're not able to prove that that person has given you consent, then it means you are careless with what you do. After documenting it, you're meant to have an online copy on an Excel sheet like Lola mentioned, which I'm making reference to repeatedly. And then if you're able to document all that, there is no way somebody would tell you they didn't give you consent, because it should be there, it should be documented. And then there is a column where that person will have to append, even if they cannot sign, they should be able to do a thumbprint. So if that thumbprint is screened, I am sure it will be discovered that the person actually gave you consent. So the issue of documentation is sacrosanct. It shouldn't be overemphasized.
Okay, so sorry, I think we lost Barth there. However, for all the other questions in the Q&A session, which we may not be able to take at the moment, please be assured that we would answer them, and it will be part of the documents when we are sending in the recording of this webinar. That's all we have time for today, folks. Thanks again to you, Lola and Barth, for your informative presentations, and to all of you, our dear participants, for your very engaging and challenging questions. If you want to hear more about the future RSH webinars, kindly visit our website and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. We would like to use this opportunity to announce to you that the United Nations Assembly has proclaimed 18th of November as World Day for the prevention of and healing from child sexual exploitation, abuse, and violence. Thank you once again. We hope to connect with you again soon. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.